Be me, Meredith, 28. Work in marketing. Have been doing the work for years to dismantle oppressive systems, particularly passionate about gender equality and calling out problematic behavior. Genuinely believe I'm making the world a better place through my activism. Monday morning team meeting. Coworker Jake suggests adjusting our campaign timeline. Actually, Jake, that's a pretty short-sighted approach that doesn't consider... He tries to explain his reasoning. I'm sorry, are you mansplaining project management to me right now? Entire room goes silent. Jake just nods and says, never mind, your approach works fine. Feel vindicated that I shut down his obvious attempt to dominate the conversation. Later that week at family dinner, Brother Marcus mentions he's been feeling overwhelmed with work and his relationship. You know what, Marcus? Maybe instead of complaining, you could examine how your privilege has made you expect everything to be easy. He starts to respond about his actual struggles. Oh, please, male fragility much? You literally have every advantage in society. He stops talking and just picks at his food. Mom changes subject awkwardly. Whatever. He needs to hear these truths even if they make him uncomfortable. Friday night drinks with friend group. Thomas brings up an article about male suicide rates. Seriously, Thomas? We're really going to center men's problems right now? I just thought it was concerning that... Let me guess, you think feminism is somehow responsible for men's issues? Roll my eyes dramatically. Classic deflection from actual oppression. Maybe focus that energy on supporting women instead. Thomas gets this weird look and orders another beer. Conversation dies completely. Good. Maybe now we can talk about something important. Work happy hour next week. David from accounting tries to share his perspective on the gender pay gap. Actually, Meredith, I've noticed in our department, the women are consistently, David, stop right there. Make exaggerated hand gesture. Your lived experience as a man literally cannot speak to women's workplace discrimination. But I was just, no buts. This is exactly how patriarchy perpetuates itself, through men assuming their voices matter most in conversations about gender. Few people start checking their phones. David mumbles something about heading home early. Feel proud for educating him about his biases. Weekend coffee with my friend group of like-minded women. We spend 2 hours dissecting every problematic thing the men in our lives have said recently. It's exhausting having to constantly educate them, I say. Right? Like, it's not our job to do their emotional labor, agrees Sarah. The audacity of thinking their opinions matter equally on issues that affect us, adds Rebecca. We all nod in agreement. It feels so validating to be around people who truly understand. Back at work Monday, notice Jake barely makes eye contact during meetings. When I ask his opinion on the new initiative, he just says, whatever you think is best. Weird, but probably means my feedback is finally getting through to him. He's learning not to take up so much space in conversations. Family barbecue that weekend. Marcus shows up but barely talks to me. When I try to engage him about his therapy, which I suggested, he gives one-word answers. How's the therapist working out? Fine. Are you discussing your internalized toxic masculinity? Sure. You know, this emotional unavailability is exactly what I mean about. He just walks away mid-sentence. How rude but typical male behavior when confronted with growth opportunities. Notice Thomas hasn't been showing up to group hangouts. Ask Jessica where he's been. Oh, he said he was feeling pretty drained lately and wanted some space. Typical man, can't handle being held accountable for his behavior. Probably for the best anyway. His energy was always kind of problematic. At work, David starts eating lunch alone instead of joining our usual group. When I sit down at his table to continue our conversation from last week. Hey David, I wanted to follow up on what we discussed about workplace dynamics. He literally gets up and says he has calls to make, walks away with half his sandwich uneaten. Seriously? This is exactly the kind of defensive behavior that proves my point. Marcus starts only communicating through texts with me, Even at family events, he'll be talking and laughing with everyone else. Moment I join the conversation, he suddenly has to help mom in the kitchen or check something outside. Bring this up to him directly. Marcus, I've noticed you seem to shut down whenever I try to have meaningful conversations with you. I don't shut down. This is exactly what I mean. You're being emotionally unavailable right now. He just shrugs and says he's tired. Classic deflection. Friend group dynamics getting weird too. Went out last Friday and Thomas actually showed up. The moment I walked in, he was laughing and animated with everyone. Soon as he saw me, his whole demeanor changed, gave a polite hey, and spent the rest of the night talking to the other women only. When I tried to join their conversation about politics, he excused himself to the bathroom, came back and sat at the bar, alone scrolling his phone. Eventually left without saying goodbye to anyone. Whatever. Probably couldn't handle being around someone who challenges his worldview. Work situation getting more noticeable. Jake literally only speaks when directly asked questions, gives bare minimum responses, and never offers suggestions anymore. During brainstorming sessions, he just sits there silent. When our boss asks for his input, he says, I defer to Meredith's expertise. Finally, the recognition I deserve, but something feels off about his energy. David has started working with headphones on all day. When I need to collaborate with him, he's polite but keeps everything strictly professional. No more casual conversations or shared complaints about management. Just yes, no, and I'll get that to you by end of day. It's like talking to a robot. Decide to address this pattern head on. Corner Jake after a meeting. Jake, I've noticed you've been pretty quiet lately. Is everything okay? Everything's fine, just focusing on work. Are you sure? Because if my feedback has made you defensive, that's something we should talk about. No defense here. I appreciate your perspectives. But his tone is completely flat, and he's already backing toward the door. We could grab coffee and discuss. Actually, I have a deadline. Thanks, though. He's gone before I can respond. Family dinner becomes increasingly awkward. Marcus arrives late, eats quickly, helps with dishes, then leaves early. Barely makes eye contact with me the entire time. When Mom asks about his dating life, he gives vague answers. I jump in with helpful advice about examining his dating patterns through an anti-oppression lens. He actually winces and says he needs to get going, hugs everyone else goodbye, gives me a stiff wave. Mom looks confused and asks if we had a fight. Explain that he's probably just processing some uncomfortable truths about his privilege. Friend group hangouts becoming strange. Thomas stopped coming entirely. When I ask about him, everyone gets vague. Oh, he's just busy with work stuff. Yeah, he mentioned wanting to focus on some personal projects, but I see him posting pictures hanging out with other people. Clearly he's avoiding me specifically. Probably can't handle being around someone who doesn't coddle his ego. Even potential romantic connections getting weird. Been talking to this guy Alex from my yoga class for weeks. Conversations were flowing well. He seemed genuinely interested. We planned a coffee date to discuss our shared interest in social justice. Spent the date explaining how his interest in men's rights issues was problematic. I get that you think it's about equality, but you have to understand how that rhetoric is used to silence women. He nodded politely, but seemed to withdraw. When I suggested reading materials about internalized misogyny, he checked his phone, said he had to leave early for a family thing, texted later that he wasn't ready for dating after all. His loss clearly wasn't ready for someone who would challenge his growth. Pattern becoming undeniable now. Every man in my life has become either completely silent around me or disappeared entirely. Even casual male acquaintances avoid extended conversations. When I speak up in mixed gender groups, the men go quiet and start looking at their phones. Obviously, this is their fragility showing, but it's getting isolating. Finally decide to ask my friend Mike for honest feedback. Mike's been in my life for 8 years, known for being straightforward. Figure he'll give me real talk about what's happening. Meet him for lunch. Haven't seen him in months. Mike, I need your honest perspective on something. Okay, shoot. I've noticed that a lot of men in my life seem to be withdrawing lately, like they're uncomfortable around me. He gets this look, like he's choosing his words carefully. What do you think is causing that? Well, I think it's probably their discomfort with being held accountable. You know how men get when their privilege is challenged. Mike is quiet for a long moment. Meredith, can I ask you something? Do you actually want my honest opinion, or do you want me to agree with your theory? Of course I want honesty. That's why I asked you. Because in my experience, when you ask for opinions, you usually have the answer already figured out. Feel defensive immediately. That's not true. I'm open to feedback. Okay, can I talk for like 5 uninterrupted minutes, and you just listen? Agree, even though his tone is making me uncomfortable. Meredith, I've watched you in action for years now, and I need to tell you something that's probably going to be hard to hear. Already feel myself preparing counter-arguments, but stay quiet. The reason men are withdrawing from you isn't because they can't handle being challenged. It's because you've made it impossible to have actual conversations with you. What do you mean? You don't let people finish sentences. You assign motivations to everything we say. You dismiss our experiences before you even hear them. Starting to feel heated, but try to stay calm. I'm just calling out problematic behavior when I see it. No, Meredith, you're not calling out behavior. You're attacking people's character based on their gender. That's not... See, right there. I'm not done talking, and you're already formulating why I'm wrong. Feel my face get hot, but force myself to stay quiet. Do you remember when Thomas brought up male suicide rates? He was deflecting from women's issues. Was he? Or was he sharing something that genuinely concerned him and you immediately made it about yourself? Starting to feel sick to my stomach. Think about Jake at work. Every time he offers an idea, you shut him down before hearing it. Then you call it mansplaining. But he was trying to dominate the conversation. How do you know that? Did you ask him, or did you just assume that's what was happening? Can't answer immediately because I'm realizing I never actually asked. Meredith, when was the last time you had a conversation with a man where you didn't correct, educate, or challenge him? Think about it and genuinely cannot remember. That's not... I'm trying to create awareness. No. You're trying to be right, and you're making everyone around you feel like garbage in the process. Feel tears starting and try to defend myself. So I'm supposed to just let misogyny slide? Where's the misogyny, Meredith? Jake suggesting a timeline change, Thomas caring about suicide rates, Marcus sharing that he's struggling. Those are examples of male privilege, and they're examples of human beings trying to communicate with you, and you turning everything into a gender war. Stomach is churning now. You want to know why your brother doesn't talk to you anymore? Because every conversation becomes a lecture about his privilege. He needs to examine his... He's working 2 jobs to pay off student loans and taking care of your aging grandmother while dealing with depression. What privilege exactly? Feel like I'm going to be sick. You want to know why Thomas stopped coming around? Because you laughed at him when he mentioned feeling isolated after his divorce. I didn't laugh at him. You literally said, "Welcome to how women feel all the time," and rolled your eyes. Realize with horror that I did do that. You want to know why David won't talk to you? Because you humiliated him in front of the entire happy hour group. I was educating him about workplace dynamics. You were performing your superiority at his expense. Meredith, I need you to really hear this next part. Feel like I'm dissociating, but force myself to focus. You've become a bully. You've become exactly the kind of person you claim to fight against. That's not, I'm fighting oppression. No, you're oppressing people. You're using social justice language as weapons to attack anyone who doesn't immediately submit to your worldview. Hands are literally shaking now. You've created an environment where men can't speak honestly around you without being attacked. So what am I supposed to do? Just stay silent about injustice? What injustice, Meredith? Show me one actual example of oppression from the men in your life. Open my mouth, but can't think of a single concrete example. That's what I thought. You've been fighting imaginary battles and treating real people like enemies. Feel completely raw and exposed. The men in your life didn't withdraw because they can't handle strong women. They withdrew because you made them feel like their thoughts, feelings, and experiences don't matter. But systemic oppression exists, yes, but that doesn't mean every individual man is your oppressor. You're making Marcus feel like a villain for struggling with mental health. You're making Jake feel incompetent for having ideas. You're making Thomas feel like his pain doesn't count. Realize I'm crying and don't even know when it started. Mike, I never meant to hurt anyone. I know you didn't, but impact matters more than intent. What do I do? How do I fix this? You start by taking responsibility, full responsibility. Not I'm sorry, but you need to understand, just responsibility. And then you examine your own behavior instead of everyone else's. And you start listening to people instead of waiting for your turn to correct them. Spend the rest of lunch in silence, processing everything. Realize that every single action Mike described, I remember differently. In my memory, I was the reasonable one standing up to problematic behavior, but now I'm seeing how it must have looked from the other side, and it's horrifying. Drive home feeling completely shattered. Review every conversation I can remember from the past year. See them all differently now. Marcus trying to share his struggles, me immediately making it about privilege. Jake offering work suggestions, me shutting him down as mansplaining. Thomas expressing concern about male suicide, me dismissing it as deflection. David trying to share observations, me humiliating him publicly. Alex trying to discuss his interests, me lecturing him about problematic thinking. Realize that in every single case, I assumed negative intent. Assumed they were trying to dominate, deflect, or diminish. Never once considered they might just be communicating. Never once asked clarifying questions. Never once gave them the benefit of the doubt I demand for myself. Think about the friend group dynamics, how conversations would flow naturally until I arrived, how men would literally leave rooms when I entered, how they'd give one-word answers to my questions. Thought it was their fragility. Now realize it was self-preservation. They learned that anything they said around me would be weaponized against them. Remember the echo chamber conversations with my female friends, how we'd spend hours dissecting and criticizing the men in our lives, how we'd interpret everything through the least charitable lens possible, how we'd reinforce each other's victim narratives, realize we were creating our own toxic environment. And I was the ringleader. Think about Alex from yoga class, how excited he seemed initially about our shared values, how his face fell when I started lecturing him about men's rights issues. He was probably trying to have a genuine conversation about equality. I immediately assumed he was the enemy. Drove away someone who might have been a real partner, someone who actually cared about justice issues. Spend the next week really observing my own behavior. Catch myself interrupting my female coworkers too. Notice how I assign motivations to people before they finish speaking. Realize I've been doing this to everyone, not just men. But the men bore the brunt because I saw them as inherently problematic. Try to reach out to Marcus. Text asking if we can talk. Takes him 2 days to respond with sure. We meet for coffee and I can see how guarded he is. Marcus, I owe you an apology. Okay. I've been treating you like an enemy instead of my brother. See his shoulders relax slightly. I made assumptions about your experiences and never actually listened to you. I need you to know that I love you, and I'm sorry for making you feel like your struggles don't matter. He's quiet for a long time. Meredith, I've been afraid to talk to you for months. I know, and that's on me. Every time I tried to share something with you, it became a lecture about my privilege. I know, I was wrong. I stopped telling you about therapy because you kept trying to direct what I should work on. Feel sick hearing this. I stopped sharing about dating because you'd analyze every woman I mentioned like she was a victim of my toxic masculinity. I'm so sorry, Marcus. I love you too, but I felt like I couldn't be human around you, like I had to be perfect, or you'd attack me. We talk for 2 hours. He tells me about his actual experiences, the depression, the financial stress, the loneliness, how my lectures made him feel like his pain was invalid because he's male, how he started avoiding family gatherings because he never knew what would set me off, how he wanted to support my activism but felt like I saw him as the problem to be solved. By the end, we're both crying, but it feels like the first real conversation we've had in years. Decide to reach out to Jake at work, ask if he has time for coffee. Can see him tense up when I ask, "Just coffee, no agenda. I owe you an apology." He looks confused but agrees. Meet at a neutral location away from work. "Jake, I've been reflecting on my behavior, and I realize I've been treating you unfairly." "It's fine, Meredith." "No, it's not fine. I've been shutting down your ideas before hearing them. I've been assuming negative intent when you were just trying to collaborate. I turned you into an adversary when you were trying to be a teammate." He's quiet for a moment. "I stopped contributing in meetings because nothing I said was ever good enough. I know, and I'm sorry. I felt like you saw me as some kind of threat instead of a colleague. I did, and that was wrong. I started dreading work because I never knew what would be problematic about my input." Hear the exhaustion in his voice. Realize how much emotional labor I put him through just by being his coworker. "Jake, I don't expect forgiveness, but I want you to know I'm working on changing this behavior." "I appreciate that, Meredith." Over the next few weeks, try to reach out to other men I've pushed away. David is polite, but clearly wants to keep things professional. Thomas is willing to talk, but keeps things surface level. Alex doesn't respond to my message at all. Realize some bridges may be permanently burned, and that's a consequence I have to live with. Start really examining my thought patterns. Notice how I automatically look for problems in everything men say. Catch myself preparing counter-arguments before people finish talking. Realize I've been treating conversations like debates to be won, instead of exchanges to learn from. Start practicing just listening without formulating responses. In meetings, force myself to ask clarifying questions instead of making assumptions. "Jake, can you tell me more about your thinking on that timeline?" instead of "that's short-sighted." "David, what data are you looking at for those observations?" instead of "your perspective," as a man can't speak to women's experiences. Notice how much more productive our collaborations become when I'm not constantly on the attack. Realize the most painful truth. I became the very thing I claimed to fight. I became someone who silenced, dismissed, and dehumanized people based on their identity. I created hostile environments where people couldn't speak freely. I used power, social, verbal, ideological, to bully and intimidate. I refused to see the humanity in people I disagreed with. I turned into an oppressor while calling myself an activist. Understand now why men choose silence. It's not weakness or privilege. It's self-preservation against constant hostility. Why engage when anything you say will be twisted into evidence of your moral failings? Why share when vulnerability will be weaponized against you? Why participate when your perspective is invalid by default? The silence isn't malicious, it's protective. Start seeing how many good men I've driven away. Marcus, who would have been my biggest supporter. Jake, who could have been a genuine collaborator. Thomas, who was trying to be a caring friend. David, who was attempting the honest dialogue. Alex, who shared my values but had different experiences. They weren't the enemy. They were potential allies I turned into threats through my behavior. Realize the broader implications. How many men have women like me driven into actual resentment? How many potential feminist allies have been pushed away by hostile activism? How much legitimate progress has been undermined by people like me, who turn every interaction into warfare? Finally understand that feminism should lift everyone up, not tear half the population down. That equality means seeing everyone's humanity, not dismissing people based on their demographics. That real progress requires coalition building, not ideological purity tests and constant conflict. 6 months later, relationships are slowly improving. Marcus and I have regular coffee dates now. He started sharing more about his life again. Jake and I actually collaborated on a successful project. David will occasionally join group lunches again. Thomas came to one friend gathering, though he's still cautious. Alex never responded, and I've accepted that's okay.